All right. Hello, everybody. This is the Agriculture Recovery Task Force meeting number 6. And the agenda for today, and Roy, let me know if there's anything else that we should add to it, but um, is really just updates from your respective organizations or agencies, any feedback on the final report, and then I want to spend a bulk of the time on identifying next steps and vision for this group going forward. Anything I'm missing, Roy?
I don't think you're missing anything. I at some point I'm gonna add a little update on the soil testing capabilities that UVM extension has come into. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's about it.
Do we want to start with updates if anyone has one to offer, and then maybe Roy can give us the full soil testing rundown?
I suppose from FSA's side, I mean, we are still processing claims steadily, slowly but surely. We have a number of six-figure claims that are just in the approval process. I'm not quite sure when they will be released, but we have to, I've mentioned before, we go through this very time-consuming and bureaucratic process. So that's ongoing. There is a nationwide task force on one of our major insurance programs, disaster relief programs, which will not impact anything that happened in 2023 and probably nothing in 2024. But, the process that we go through is being reviewed and hopefully will be improved. I have mentioned several times, to the point I've hopefully not crying wolf, but I'm confident I'm not. But we are still working, or Washington, more to the point, is still working on a feed purchase relief program. I do not know at this point what form it's going to take. I keep being told that they are working on it, but they've got so many other disasters to work on that it's just taking time. And also, it's of course been delayed by this, what are we with? I think we're the fourth continuing resolution that's just totally wrecked our budgeting process for the last several months. So I'm still hopeful that I will have something to announce, positive to announce on that, and hopefully in the not too distant future, but I can't tell you any more than that. So that's my update.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you. Anyone else have updates?
Hey, Nicole, I might add just a couple updates from NRCS, and I apologize. I'm having some technical difficulties here. I'm going to switch to my screen that has some updates. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. I was confused and looking around for who was talking, though, because your video is not moving, but that's okay.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah, I don't know. Something's going on. So Travis with NRCS, just wanted to report that through our EQIP Environmental Quality Incentives Program, disaster assistance. So that was the funding that we set aside specifically for disaster assistance. We're wrapping that up. We entered into contracts with a total of 143 producers. Those are just different operations across the state, for a total of a little over $6.8 million of financial assistance to those producers. The practices or activities that we focused on were cover crop, residue management, pasture and hayland planting, and then the bulk majority of that funding went towards feed management. It was roughly about 8,157 acres total for that funding that targeted helping about 83,000 animal units. That's through our EQIP disaster assistance. And I will say we paid out about 98.5% of that to producers already. And we just have a handful of producers that are waiting to renovate some pasture and had some delays in the fall. So happy to kind of wrap that program up. I will say that with our emergency watershed protection program, this is quite a bit different than our EQIP program. EWP, the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, runs through a sponsor. So typically a town or the state will be a sponsor. And this is the program that really steps in and protects infrastructure, homes, if you will, from imminent threats. And right now we have roughly, I think, across 36 different sponsors across 10 counties, will be a total of about $13 million that will go out to those communities to address lots of different things, stabilizing stream banks that may be eroding due to high water levels, to protect homes or other infrastructure out there, or debris removal in streams. But just wanted to give you a heads up that that's kind of where we're at from our two programs that really relate to natural disasters and flooding in this situation. I will say that we did visit 237 sites for the EWP program. And then so far, 108 sites have been funded and moving forward. So that's NRCS's update. Thanks.
Travis, are you expecting to do any more of the 100-something that were visited? You said you visited 200 and funded 130. Oh, you're on
Yeah,
mute.
you're muted.
Sorry, I don't know. I didn't mute myself. Maybe I did. So FEMA's cost share went up to 100% recently over the past couple of months. And so EWP is typically a 75-25. We take care of 75% and the sponsor takes care of 25. Recently, we did bump that up to match FEMA's cost share rate. And unfortunately, when we were at the 75-25, we did have some sponsors back out because typically they'll pass that 25% match onto the landowner or whomever that is. So we did have, I think, about 13 projects back out because of that match. We've reached back out to them and have given them a deadline if they want to participate at the 100% level. And I think they have about 36 days left to decide whether they want to participate. So we anticipate more, we just don't know how many more.
Travis, quick question. I know that EWP is for protecting imminent infrastructure. That's why I didn't realize that debris removal was included in this. So that's good to know.
Yeah. And I will share the reason debris removal is included in that is because if there's another event that occurs, oftentimes what will happen is that debris will plug up, bridges, other waterways, and could do further damage. And so that's why debris removal is included in EWP.
Really good to know. Thank you.
Yep.
I can give a short update on farm and forest liability.
Thanks, Liz.
This is our busiest season. It's been, we have about 15 or so farm and forest business planners across the state, placed at partner organizations, including UVM Extension, Intervale Center, NOFA, Center for an Agricultural Economy, and Land for Good. So folks are really busy digging into numbers and planning and projections. With all kinds of working lands businesses. A lot of those folks are still really feeling the effects of flooding and or the frost last spring. So doing work to just figure out how they're gonna advance with that reality. I will say that our planners have also been spending a lot of time supporting capital access, including grants. And that's been, I think we're sort of really lucky as a community to have had this huge influx of all kinds of grant dollars for agriculture, both disaster relief and some of the new programs that were set up at the Agency of Ag. And it's felt like a different season and a different context for our program, because I think a lot of people are just, to some extent, taking that, not for granted, but it's a new reality, and next year will be a different new reality. So trying to really work with businesses to figure out what external funding sources are reasonable and a good fit for them and what aren't, and the competitiveness of that. That's been a bigger part of our program than ever before. So yeah, really busy, lots of work to do. We're also seeing a shift with some of our partners and trying to build more climate resiliency into our farm business planning. So that's an evolving project. The Northeast Organic Farming Association is really, one of many organizations taking the lead on what that'll look like. And they've hired a bunch of new staff who are going to be doing sort of organic practices, climate resilient practices, and really partnering with farm viability to do sort of the financial and operational planning for those kinds of interventions, and making sure people can afford them, know what is the most feasible for their business to invest in. So really excited about that work moving forward. That's it.
Thank you. Any other updates before we move to the soil testing?
I can give a really quick update on BGAP. So there's not a lot to report, but so just as a recollection, there was 132 ag awardees processed here at the Agency of Agriculture, receiving 3.7 million in awards. There were other agricultural businesses that were also that received awards through the Agency of Commerce under different categories. So food service or manufacturing. So like Cabot Creamery, for example, is not within the 3.7 million in the 132 ag applications because it's considered manufacturing. So that was reviewed by that, and other similar business types were reviewed by the Agency of Commerce. But we're now at the stage of reporting. So we're starting to hear from awardees that they have some questions around the reporting side. And so in case you also are hearing some of that same line of questioning, there has been an email that's gone from the Agency of Commerce to all the 530 BGAP awardees, and with instructions that they provide a narrative update on their business, how the money was spent, and proof of payment. There will also be a selected group from within the 530 that will be kind of captured in a more targeted, detailed audit reporting process. Likely some of the larger awardees will kind of go through that more detailed monitoring process. So that's the brief BGAP piece I wanted to share. And there are questions around it being taxable income as well. So that's always comes up at tax season.
And Abby, is that the standard response? Like, this may be considered taxable income. Please talk to your accountant.
Yeah.
All right. You want to take it away, Roy?
Yeah, I won't be long. Because I need extra breath to talk. So one of the great things that has happened in the last few months here at UVM Extension is that we received funding through the appropriations mechanism. And the appropriations mechanisms put the money into the Food Systems Research Center. But it's slated for soil health, the development of a soil laboratory. That would enable us to get our soil testing done more efficiently, and build on what we already had. We had kind of rudimentary soil testing capabilities here at UVM, but as many of you might know, we've been sending a lot of our soil tests and assessments outside of the state to get that done. That is actually going to change. We've received funding, and so we've just got this set up, and Joshua Faulkner is the PI on this, and we have established now the Soil Health Research and Extension Center, SHREC, SHREC. And we'll be doing all of the testing that we have over the last couple of decades or more sent to Cornell and Maine and elsewhere. But no longer will we be bogged down by having to have our soil subjected to be equated to tobacco soils in Virginia or wherever, or whatever soils in New York. We'll be doing our own, and we're well on our way. Some of the equipment is already purchased, and very expensive equipment. We're looking at investments of over $6 million into this, but SHREC is looming. It's out there. I'm going to have Josh Faulkner kind of do a round the state kind of report out at some point, so that you get more familiar with what the Soil Health Research and Extension Center is about. But we have our own system in-house, in-state, and I promise that this is going to be a boost to our farming community, and as well serve some of the services that we had to, depend on Maine and New York for the emergency testing we did last year after the floods. So I think we're on the right track. The funding the timing was perfect, and we're on our way to having I hopefully good service from SHREC. That's
Roy,
about it.
That's amazing news, and very, very big news, and very glad to hear it. I'm sorry if I missed you saying this, and I think you might have, is when it will be up and ready to function, the timeline?
So when you do a lab like this, you have to kind of phase it in, because you new machinery, new people, so I feel that over the next 6 months you'll hear more and more of what's going on here. But the equipment is being purchased and being installed, and we're in that process right now. So in the next 6 months or so, you'll hear much more about it. But I think within 6 to 8 months, we'll be well on our way to having a working soil test Soil Health Research and Extension Center, functional at UVM.
Do you know if, I assume since this is soil health related, do you know if they'll also be able to do the cash test, like the Cornell assessment? Or a similar version of it?
Yes, we'll be able to do a version of the cash test.
Wow.
Joshua and others, and there are other folks within CALS who are also involved, but we'll be publishing some kind of little brochure on exactly what we'll be able to offer. But the hope is that we'll be able to do the testing that we've always kind of exported.
Awesome.
And increasingly over time, Marley will be able to do even more than that. The whole idea is that it's going to be funded from the appropriations money at this point, but over time, ARS will step in and fund it on an annual basis. Well, the cool thing is that it's the Soil Health Research and Extension Center. We want to make sure that this is embedded in extension, so it's a public service. Certainly, I know we will have to subsidize some of the costs, but the fact is that our farmers really deserve this.
Are you gonna get to hire some people to run it? Poor Joshua can't continue to do everything. Holy smokes.
Well, Joshua's PI of this, I mean, he's certainly not going to be in the lab doing the work. I mean, we already hired 3 agronomists and other soil testing people who have been in the Middlebury area, as John might be aware. So we have folks who can do the work. But yeah, we would definitely have folks focused on doing the soil testing and all that.
Hey, Roy, I might add on that note, sorry to jump in, Marley. NRCS through our EQIP program, and I think even through our CSP program, we actually provide an incentive to producers to take a soil test and develop a plan from that. And so I think there might be a really good opportunity maybe to collaborate on that. Not to say that we've got a lot of money and we're trying to find places for it, but I think it fits well with what we're trying to do right now. So there might be some opportunities. So cool. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
So the next business on the agenda was just to open the floor to specifically ask for, since the final task force report was published, and we've done a little bit of media work on that to get it out there. Just wanted to open the floor to the group to provide any feedback on the final report if you have it. And then we'll do next steps after that.
I wanted to ask though whether anybody saw some of the media reports that we did and how good Nicole was at those. Just wanted to point that out.
If you can't tell, I was very nervous when we went to WCAX. So I appreciate
I thought
Roy
Across the
making me
Fence
feel
was
better.
good. Yeah, I saw that. That was great.
Thanks.
Across the Fence is saved. You can watch that afterwards, right, Roy?
Mhm.
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Something to do over lunch today. Thank you.
It's saved, but you can also go into the YouTube channel and just look up Across the Fence. And
Everything is on YouTube, isn't it? This is terrifying me.
Yeah, we knew what you did last summer.
My point. Drones and YouTube. I'm scared to death.
I guess I'm just sort of curious, and maybe this is part of the next steps piece, Nicole, but I mean, I think there were some, logical ongoing work items outlined in the report. And I'm just curious, kind of collectively, how we think the best way to approach engaging on some of those projects might be. Is it a continuation of the task force? Is it independent organizations sort of taking the lead and somehow having some communication mechanism, or something altogether different that people had in mind?
So I want feedback from the group, but I also just want to say that Abby did give me her personal kind of like visioning for how we can move forward. And I know that this was a while ago, so if you can't remember it all, that's fine. But I loved it. So if folks have feedback, great. But then Abby, I'd love you to talk a little bit about how you see we can continue to use this forum.
I really do forget what I said.
Abby, you're supposed to write it down. Brilliance
I
needs to
know,
be
I don't
recorded
know what I was
immediately.
thinking that day.
Well, while you think, Abby, it would be interesting to talk about the structure of this as opposed to the structure of other organizations or committees or groups or something. There's the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership, obviously, which is focused, not surprisingly, on agricultural water quality, but also has a climate resilience aspect to it as well, though not necessarily as direct as some of what's been talked about here. So the question might be whether or not this committee continues, because I do think the coordination among these groups is really critical. But I think, I'm double checking, but I'm pretty sure that everybody on this call has a representative to the VACA partnership also, in some form. So I'm curious how other folks feel about duplicating this, not duplicating, also continuing this effort with this committee, or perhaps shifting it to the VACA group, where there is also some limited staff support. Because Nicole, you've been awesome with this, you and Roy both, but I suspect you guys probably don't have capacity to continue a great deal of next steps on this. But correct me if I'm wrong.
We certainly don't have administrative support specifically for this group, but depending on consensus, I'm willing to continue and or obviously I've sought Abby and Nina's assistance with this already, so I'm really open to feedback. I do really like the collective group that we have here, and I feel like it's been really great for me personally to stay informed and to be able to really follow those different recovery efforts around the state. I'm not as familiar with the other table. I know, Nina, you go to that, but I don't. So,
What do you and Travis think? You guys are both, and John, all very active on vodka.
go ahead, Nina.
I feel as though there are certain recommendations that might fit outside of the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership that other entities may, desire some support and coordination for developing strategies to move those recommendations forward. And at the same time, I feel there are certain strategies that it might make the most sense and be very natural for the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership to establish some interim strategies and move items forward. And just on the overall task force, I think the value I see that we don't seem to receive in other spaces or in other committee meetings is really the updates on how these recommendations are being combined into state recovery and emergency response efforts, right? So how are we taking this to sort of make an updated plan moving forward?
I think Nina stole my words. I was going to say, I think there are some recommendations that fit within VACA, others that may not be the most appropriate fit. But for me, I don't, feedback wise, I think the report was great. Really appreciate this process. I think I'm more interested in next steps, as everybody has mentioned. It's interesting within USDA, we have authority, and John heads this, what's called the USDA State Emergency Board that really convenes and leads USDA's effort, if you will. And I think one of the things that we found challenging was not knowing what others were. I think two things: not knowing what others were doing, and then two, kind of a lack of data of what producers needed. And that was kind of, that's kind of, we debate, chicken before the egg before the chicken, whatever that might be. It was a little bit challenging. And I think we're really open to being at the table to figure those couple of things out that would be helpful for us to be able to respond in a way that's most helpful. We support VOCUP, right? We think it's a great collaborative partnership and see that there is a role, from that aspect. So I'll turn it over to John.
Well, I sort of feel I have to respond, Travis, since you said I was in charge. Because I don't feel like I'm in charge, but I'm feel very constrained because of how USDA operates. We don't have the sort of flexibility that I think you have within the state agencies. Clearly I was frustrated by, and still am frustrated by, our inability to move quickly and smoothly. I mean, I mentioned in our update, we're still paying out, and will be for some months yet, paying out to producers who were impacted by the flood. I mean, we're paying out for producers impacted by the freeze. It just takes time to go through our process. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that we will make some changes, but they're not going to happen overnight. And I can't predict what they'll be or when they'll happen. I mean, of course, the other issue is the Farm Bill, which may have some impact on our responses to disasters. I certainly know that our congressional delegation and Peter Welsh and his staff in particular are very interested in moving some items in the Farm Bill. But whether that'll happen or not, it's a bipartisan bill in a system that doesn't seem to work in a bipartisan way these days. So we'll see. So I'm basically expressing frustration with how we can do. We sort of had a big deal about getting a secretarial declaration of disaster, and it didn't amount to much, to be honest. Between the group of us here, it didn't amount to much. But that's what we have. But as you all know, I am absolutely dedicated to Vermont Ag and how we do so. We will do whatever we can, and to get the information out there to farmers and try and make our systems more easier to operate through. And I think part of our issue was we have a lot of new employees, and just getting them used to administering a disaster was an issue. So
John, that statement surprises me a little bit, that the secretarial declaration didn't amount to much. isn't the declaration necessary?
Yes,
For-
yeah, yes, it is, and I'm probably being, I guess when I say it didn't amount to much, it didn't mean that I had access to a checkbook to give grants. So that's probably, and yet I could see, as we all could, the need for immediate help. And so, yes, I should be more careful with my words, Troy. You need the declaration, and a secretarial declaration has advantages, surprisingly, over a presidential declaration, in that it is for it can be for a much longer period of time. But initially, it's it's access. It supposedly does reduce paperwork, although I need to check on that. But it also allows access of farmers to low interest loans. But we're in a system where farmers don't want low interest loans, really. I mean, if they manage it properly, they can actually utilize them within their whole loan portfolio to help maybe relieve some pressure on other loans. But, and I think we had one or two farmers who did that. But it was not it was not a big help in that area. And it is, it is sort of frustrating that a lot of our rules and regulations are very much geared to Midwestern and Western farming and not to the Northeast United States. They talk a lot about drought, but not a lot about flooding. That's part of the reason it's taking as long as it's taking to get a feed purchase program through, because you have all these lawyers who are working for USDA who are saying, well, we need to somehow structure this so it fits within the enabling legislation, because it doesn't directly say, okay, we can give money to farmers to buy feed in a flooding emergency. So how do they structure it so we can do that? And I think it's going to happen, but it takes a long time to get everybody in the whole Office of Management and Budget and all the way up the system to sign off. And it's, when in a disaster, you really need to just flip a switch and have these things ready to go. That's what I would like to see. But I'm sorry, I'm expressing more personal frustration than I probably should in my position.
I find that really helpful though, John, to continue to have these conversations to understand, we do this too within the Agency of Ag, right? Like we can't just change state policy and statute instantly, even though we know things need an update. So I feel like this conversation and this table of people, it's really helpful to be able to just put it out there so that we can then explain that to producers and farmers. That's helpful for me as well. So I want to go back to this because I feel like this is part of my rationale for why I would like to continue to kind of use this group going forward. But I realize, Liz, you have been waiting a long time, so I want to give you some time to speak.
Sure. I feel like I'm not quite sure if I'm responding to the question still that prompted this discussion, but in looking at the recommendations, I really feel like a dispersed approach to this makes a lot of sense. Like, I think it'd be great to be able to bring this group back together on a semi-regular basis, but there's some pretty specific recommendations with specific stakeholders identified, and also there's some that don't have specific stakeholders identified already. And I think the themes around like extremely responsive, timely, coordinated communication is something I'm really interested in being a part of. And I think we haven't identified the clear stakeholders for that yet. And I feel like it would also, I think the report is great, but something the report doesn't quite do right now, which I'm interested to work on, is like in the immediate aftermath, hours, days, weeks, what communication was really effective and what was not, and how do we make sure we record the things that didn't work and lift up the things that did, and have a really identified group that can come back together like literally within hours of the next one. And I think the Agency of Ag has a really clear role to play here, but it can't just be the Agency of Ag, and it needs to be, because I feel like just everyone dropped everything and went immediately to like, I need to do everything I possibly can. And that is great. And it's also super confusing. So I think I'm personally interested in exploring that recommendation and figuring out how, you know, who can be involved in that. And to me, I think that's the number 3 under farmer empowerment. And then I think also we haven't really had a conversation on some of our like, hey, we have all these great existing programs and we just need to like keep those going. I'm not sure if there's anything more to say about those, but I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity to dig in more on those if we need to. Anyway, yeah, that's it.
So I love those suggestions, Liz. I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of speak my piece of what I would like to do going forward, and then just hear what others think. Is I feel like we have an established group here that really does a good job at including the majority of the ag sector, right? Like we have partners, we have federal entities, we have state entities. And so I really don't want to kind of lose the momentum that we had. I don't think that we need to necessarily meet monthly. My suggestion might be quarterly check-ins. And if there isn't anything to discuss, if we don't have an agenda, then we can cancel as necessary. But there are things that, you know, I'm sure a lot of us are doing behind the scenes that we're working on. So an example from ag, which is part of, you know, these recommendations, right, is if we needed to stand up another granting program real quick, we realized and acknowledged that there was a gap with BGAP, right, where it was longer than we anticipated to stand up. It took longer to actually review each individual application than we anticipated. Of course, we did deploy, you know, 7 staff to work on that, but for next time, it would be much easier if we just had those staff identified and ready to go. So like that's something we're working on internally in the Agency of Agriculture, is identifying that group and having them like ready to go if something like this happens and we have like emergency funding that we need to deploy quickly. So that's something that like as we develop that process and identify the members, I'd love to touch base with again. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has anything to add to that, or if you're amenable, but. Marley.
Definitely amenable, and I agree, this is a good, strong group. I just wonder whether we should be looping in any additional partners if this is going to be a standing group moving forward, whether we should be including the districts in this as some pretty strong boots on the ground post-flooding as well. Or whether you think this group should continue and perhaps funds or resources passed on to folks like the districts. I
Well,
think
I even
extends to the
wonder,
same kind of thing.
yeah, I sort of wonder with that model, Marley, is like, I'm not sure that the work has to happen by these task force members specifically, but it could be that each task force member is attached to, you know, or as Liz identified, is a stakeholder to the various recommendations. And the goal might be to bring it back, bring that recommendation to another group, but as part of the quarterly check-in or as needed check-ins of this task force, whoever that, you know, if you, Marley, are bringing something for districts to talk about, or you plus Travis or plus someone else that's sort of working on something in another setting, you just bring the update back to the task force as opposed to making this group bigger, or as opposed to trying to replicate or meld together already functioning external groups that are already meeting and doing some of this work. But it's just that we are accountable back to this task force based upon the recommendations that were generated. I may not have said that very clearly, but rather than bringing new people in, it's really more about
Sure.
like bringing the recommendations out to the stakeholders and partners that really are the thoughtful minds and engaged individuals that should be a part of the solution. And then as a task force member, bringing it back here for, you know, just a status update, an accountability check-in.
Nina?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I believe there are VACD and Conservation District staff who receive all of the Agricultural Recovery Task Force invitations as well.
So maybe sticking with this group for now, but also if we start these projects with other stakeholders, there could be kind of a clear invitation to say like, you know, does anyone else want to join these other meetings where we're synthesizing all of the working groups to make sure
Yeah.
people feel included?
For sure. I don't think it needs to be exclusive. I definitely hear both sides of it. And I definitely think we can invite other people as needed. I guess I'm erring on the side of what Abby's saying, though, in that now we're moving this to be like a quarterly meeting and it's kind of like progress updates. So I just don't want to invite a bunch of new members and like not really have a regular expectation for them, if that makes sense. Because I think it would be probably a little difficult to just come in now. But yeah, Liz, your suggestion of just folks, subject matter experts joining meetings that are relevant to them, I think that makes sense. Nina?
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, I guess I'm feeling like we do need to sort of set up some ownership around the recommendations, whether it's with the existing working groups or it's based on each individual recommendation. If we would like the Recovery Task Force to serve as sort of the accountability for us coming back together and sharing updates on what's been worked on, I feel like it would be great to get some direction on just ownership on who's going to take which recommendation and move it forward. And I think we might have some of that sort of anecdotally in our heads around who might be best fit. But I feel like that would be a useful exercise, and maybe that's, Nicole, something that you could follow up with, or we could discuss in our next meeting in terms of the next step.
Yes, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, just going to put it out there right now, when it comes to the recommendations that we made around, you know, government systems, I think ultimately state representation for that would probably lean towards myself and Steve Collier, but like ultimately, right, we have Travis and John here, and I think it's kind of just continuing to advocate for the changes we want to see and watching that. I don't know that there's a whole lot more that we would like ask this group to do, other than obviously John and Travis, if you see opportunities where you need data and or input from us, we'd love to give that. But yes, I think the others with farmer empowerment and regulatory recovery, that would be a good agenda item for our next meeting to talk about that. I do see a place for the initial subgroups there, subcommittees there.
And might I add that there's some aspects of the recommendation for that relates to farmers that myself and others in Extension have reached out to Travis about, that we're about to work on independently of this. And my guess is that we're going to have updates around that, even though it's going to maybe take on a mind of its own, I think. Travis, I know that I reached out to you with in collaboration with Chris Callahan, who is our extension engineer, to look at some issues. And I know Dan Lerner also reached out to you. So we're going to kind of make that one collective meeting to kind of look at some of the farmer-related issues. So some of the recommendations, many of the recommendations made here will be addressed through that, and that was part of the goal. But it's a broader goal in that we're also looking at factors outside of emergencies. We're looking at resilience factors as well. So all comes together and will blend in at some point.
Marley?
Nicole, were you suggesting that both of the items under the government systems would be handled separately in a different way? Because I'm just looking at number 2, and one of the things that I really feel strongly about is setting up some kind of a coordinated response action, which I think Liz was also referencing. And that seems like something we all should be talking about.
So yes, we can continue to talk about that. I also just spoke about how we're, planning on having subgroups part of our ag EOC that can respond to things like granting programs and whatnot. So yes, I think that recommendation specifically is something for this group. What I was talking about was we recommended updates to items like crop insurance and other federal disaster relief programs. And so I was just saying, like, we can continue to advocate and provide data as necessary and talk about what we see as gaps in Vermont. And, John just talked about how some of these programs, I think the issue is that they're really designed around large scale, Midwestern operations. And so I think we continue to advocate for that, but I don't know that there's much that this group would do other than continue to interact with Travis and John and our congressional, representatives from our congressional delegation. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I guess I just really agree with Nina. It would be good to put some almost champions for some of these recommendations, moving them forward. Nina and Travis and I have talked quite a bit about some of the stormwater issues that are mentioned as a recommendation, and are waiting for some more USDA information to come out on climate adaptation that I think will help inform some of that. But, we need to get moving on that too as soon as we can, I think, capacity wise. I think it'd also be interesting to look at some of the other recommendations. Like there was one about, farmers not necessarily having all the information they need ahead of time for things like debris removal from fields, where some farmers got in trouble for moving debris over and didn't necessarily have their permissions or the plans best laid out. And it really shouldn't be that difficult to come up with a few fact sheets so that we could at least have available ahead of time.
Completely agree with that. Nina, please keep me updated, and we can, have side meetings on that to move that forward for sure. Realizing that we're nearing the end of time here, are we agreeable I saw a lot of head nods that we'll move forward with quarterly, which would put our next meeting in June. And we can regroup there and continue to communicate via email. And obviously, if we work on some of those, fact sheets, we can share them out with this group regularly. I will continue to have the web page on the Agency of Agriculture webpage. There's a subsection for the Agriculture Recovery Task Force. We'll continue to update that and disseminate information as well.
Hopefully by June, we'll all be enjoying a totally different growing season.
Fingers crossed, John. Anything
am
else?
wondering-
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Nicole, I'm wondering if we do have one other intermediary step, though, of sort of identifying which recommendations, which organizations and individuals feel kind of responsible for. And then to Liz's comment that there are some recommendations that didn't specifically identify stakeholders. So there might be this one. Again, I don't know if it's an hour-long conversation or or even what the best approach is to sort of queue up both like each of our roles and then who it is that we're engaging before we then break into quarterly, which would then give us 3 months to sort of do some work before we come back together for another task force. But I don't know if we need another meeting in another month or in another couple of weeks. It's busy, I know. So I hate to be a suggester of more meetings, but.
One idea, I wonder internally, Nicole, if we could just map out like what we anticipate to be key contacts and potential, like just like what we've heard the group mention as like potential strategies to move these forward and share that with the committee for sort of feedback as like a draft strategy. And
Yeah, I'm
champion
good with
assignments.
that. And Roy, maybe we can have a meeting in between before June so we can just touch base on this. I mean, immediately with this group here, right? I know like Nina, Marley, and Travis, I would immediately put you guys on regulatory recovery and those action items. And then Abby and Liz were both really involved with the farmer empowerment. So I think that would be great to continue working there. And obviously, John and Roy and I can be wherever we're needed, but yeah, let's map that out, and then Roy and I can meet prior to the next meeting. And
Open to that. That's what I was thinking too. So,
okay.
And I think it's really helpful for us to sort of like have that framework to then when we do come back for our next task force meeting, the goal is really to share updates on our progress towards those recommendations. And maybe that is just developing, a list of strategies that we've identified to move those recommendations forward and a potential timeline or plan for them.
That sounds great. Okay. Thank you all. I won't stand in front of your lunch any longer.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
have a good afternoon.
Thank you.